and welcome to The Green Flame, the broadcast that brings you radical analysis, practical skills, and artistic expression from the revolutionary movement to defend the planet and rebuild just human communities. I am your host and comrade, Max Wilbert. Your Tesla is killing the planet. EVs won't halt the climate crisis. Here are the numbers. By Max Wilbert, originally published on Biocentric on January 28, 2025. The first time I experienced greenwashing was on April 22, 2004, Earth Day, and it came about because of a teenage crush. I was 16 and her name was Shelby. We met at community college. She was funny, intelligent, and lovely, so when she invited me to join her environmental group on a trip to Olympia to encourage legislators to protect forests, I was thrilled. After a short audience with congressional staff, we walked out of the Capitol building and into the plaza where an environmental fair was taking place. We wandered through booths hawking solar panels and encouraging forest protection and salmon restoration before we spotted something bright yellow hulking on the side of the street. It was a Hummer H2, the civilian version of the military M998 Humvee. A friendly man stood next to it with a sign reading biodiesel fueled. "Want a test ride?" he asked. Of course, we said yes. Engine on, we pulled out and cruised down the street, burning a gallon of biodiesel every 9 miles. I was feeling profoundly uncomfortable. The truth, which I couldn't articulate at the time, was eating at my stomach. What's under the hood of a Hummer matters far less than the fact that it exists. Just over a year earlier, the United States had launched an illegal invasion of Iraq. That spring, the Iraqi insurgency roared back to life, and the First Battle of Fallujah raged. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the third year of occupation saw the nation engulfed in violence. The events of April 22, 2004 were typical. Insurgents detonated a bomb on a truck carrying fuel for the U.S. military, wounding 3. An improvised explosive was detonated near the Kandahar airport as a UN convoy passed, but no one was injured. And 2 soldiers, one from the U.S. Army and one from the Afghan National Army, were killed, and 2 more U.S. military soldiers wounded in a friendly fire incident. The dead U.S. Army soldier, Pat Tillman, was a former NFL football player who enlisted after 9/11. But Tillman had grown disillusioned, telling a friend in 2003, "This war is fucking illegal." The Department of Defense covered up the friendly fire incident until after Tillman was buried, lying to both journalists and his family that he was killed in an ambush by insurgents. Tillman was just one of nearly 1 million dead in these wars, the vast majority of them civilians, and his story just one of nearly 1 million lies told in those days. The environmental impacts of the wars were catastrophic too. An Abrams tank burns more than a gallon of fuel per mile, part of why the U.S. military uses more than 14.7 million gallons of fuel each day. The U.S. used more oil per year for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq than the entire nation of Bangladesh, home to 175 million people, uses. Depleted uranium and toxic chemicals have left a legacy of birth defects and dead children. And the biotic crusts that kept the region's sandy soils from blowing away in blinding sandstorms were destroyed, crushed under the wheels of American Hummers. There I was, riding in a supposedly environmentally friendly 8,000-pound, military-inspired status symbol with a sinking feeling in my stomach. As Shelby and I walked away, we both felt sick. The idea that a Hummer can be green was a lie, and we knew it. Enter the climate profiteers. My relationship with Shelby never progressed, but the same cannot be said of greenwashing. It has thrived. In 2004, a biodiesel Hummer was a curio. Little did I know that 20 years later I would be defending Thacker Pass from a lithium mine that will supply General Motors factories with raw materials to build their electric vehicles, including the new EV version of the Hummer. If you can greenwash a Hummer, you can greenwash anything. Chris Hedges writes in his brilliant and devastating book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, Most societies never recover from the self-inflicted wounds made to their own culture during wartime. What does this mean for the United States, which has existed for 248 years and has been at war for 230 of them? Lies become normal. Civilian deaths become collateral damage. Torture becomes enhanced interrogation techniques. Drone assassinations become targeted killings. Enemies are inflated into bogeymen, and if they don't exist, they're conjured from thin air. The war on ecology is no different. Greenwashing language and policy is part of the platform of many political parties and is a key element in marketing for the world's biggest corporations. Blowing up mountains is now securing a critical mineral supply chain. For many businesses, the climate crisis is not the biggest disaster in human history. First and foremost, it's a chance for profit. As I've argued before, climate profiteers are the new war profiteers. According to the International Energy Agency, quote, if the world gets on track for net zero emissions by 2050, then the cumulative market opportunity for manufacturers of wind turbines, solar panels, lithium-ion batteries, electrolyzers, and fuel cells amounts to 27 trillion US dollars. These 5 elements alone in 2050 would be larger than today's oil industry and its associated revenues, end quote. Why Tesla is a climate disaster. And now at last we turn to Tesla, the world's most valuable automaker. The facile mainstream environmental movement believes that Tesla and all electric car manufacturers is helping to reduce carbon pollution, stop global warming, and save the planet. This is wrong, and it's important to understand why, because unless we expose the greenwashing, we have no chance of actually halting the climate crisis. I've written here previously about the destructive mining and exploitative international supply chains underlying green technology, and non-green technology for that matter. But here I want to focus on climate in particular. In their 2023 impact report, Tesla features the following slide, which says that by driving electric cars, their customers avoided releasing more than 20 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that would have been released had they been driving internal combustion engine cars. To get a better sense of Tesla's full climate impact, we have to look at other data, most especially the amount of greenhouse gases that were released by Tesla Corporation and its suppliers for things like extracting and processing raw materials like steel, composites, plastics, magnesium, nickel, glass, silicon, lead, cadmium, etc., transporting raw materials from mines and chemical plants to manufacturing facilities, manufacturing parts such as seats, computer chips, wiring, display screens, cameras, radar arrays, nylon seat belts, rubber tires, headlights, sound systems, electric motors, battery packs, and so on. Transporting these parts to Tesla facilities for final assembly, and ancillary emissions from activities like building and maintaining Tesla's facilities and charging stations, actually charging the EVs, powering lights and machinery, workers driving to and from work at Tesla facilities, and so on. The same report lists these numbers. Tesla doesn't do the math for us, likely for reasons of avoiding negative publicity through obscurity, but it's not very complicated, so I did it myself. Tesla was responsible for more than 50 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in the year 2023. That's roughly equivalent to the combined emissions of Ghana and Sudan, home to 85 million people. Here's the relevant pages from the report. In the written version of this article, there are screenshots here. I'm no mathematician, but the math is pretty damn easy. 50 million tons minus 20 million tons equals 30 million tons. Tesla's net carbon emissions impact was 30 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2023. Needless to say, that's a lot. But it's actually worse than you think, because Tesla and related activities actually released 50 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent into the atmosphere. That is a physical fact. The argument that they avoided emitting an additional 20 million metric tons is theoretical. It's math with imaginary numbers. And it doesn't change the fact that there are now 50 million metric tons more CO2 equivalent in the atmosphere than there were before. This is why, even as EVs are proliferating and more solar and wind power are being added to the grid than ever before, emissions are at all-time record highs. You can't cheat physics. Carbon emissions kill. Cars don't come magically into being, the fruit of the Elon tree. They're made of minerals mined from the earth by fossil fuel-powered machines, shipped around the world, smelted at high temperatures, and assembled in factories. In this sense, EVs are no different from internal combustion engine cars. When we quantify the numbers, creating the average EV releases more carbon emissions than creating the average gasoline car. This difference is quickly wiped out since EVs don't release emissions during driving, but it doesn't change the fact that both are highly polluting and rely on destructive mining and exploitative international supply chains. Meanwhile, the climate catastrophe is spiraling out of control. According to research out of Cornell, 1.6 billion people may become refugees due to global warming by 2060. By 2100, 1 billion deaths may be attributable to the climate crisis. We've already passed 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which means irreversible tipping points in the Earth's climate, like the collapse of the Amazon rainforest ecosystem and the melting of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, are probably unavoidable. And on top of this, meta-analysis of climate scientists has found that new scientific findings are more than 20 times as likely to indicate that global climate disruption is worse than previously expected, rather than not as bad as previously expected. Here's where Tesla comes in. Scientists have done the math to tell us the human death toll associated with emissions. This study estimates that for each 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions, one person will die from global warming. If 1,000 tons CO2 equals one dead person, then 30 million metric tons means 30,000 dead people. 50 million tons of emissions means 50,000 people dead per year. So, according to their own data, Tesla is responsible for human deaths equivalent to the 2023 to 2025 Palestinian genocide, or the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, every 16 months or so. And of course, this is not even to get into the non-human death toll associated with producing and operating cars, which is catastrophic. For more on this, read my book. The Importance of Thinking Clearly. My point is not that Tesla is any worse than other car manufacturers, or that Tesla cars are worse than gas-powered cars. It's clear that the opposite is true. Over their entire operational duration, electric cars release less greenhouse gas emissions than gas or diesel-powered cars. But that's not the point. The point is that if we look beyond a relative comparison, both types of cars are climate and ecological disasters. I'm reminded of a brilliant headline ran by The Onion in the aftermath of the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, reminding us that oil not spilling is a disaster in its own right. There's a screenshot here. The headline reads, "Millions of barrels of oil safely reach port in major environmental catastrophe." It's a headline from The Onion, a satire newspaper. Some people misinterpret my critiques of green technology as meaning that these technologies are more harmful than fossil fuels. This is a misreading of my work. The danger of electric vehicles and green energy is more insidious than a direct comparison implies. And this is why I'm so strident in my opposition to green energy, green technology, and EVs. Because these technologies are being used as excuses to not fight fossil fuels. They're the vape of the cigarette addict, the beer of the hard liquor alcoholic. They differ neither in form nor in substance, and they're being used as a way to maintain the status quo rather than engage in true transformation as the moment demands. Global warming is a crisis, and it's mainly driven by fossil fuels, which is why I've been involved in fighting coal trains and coal export terminals on the West Coast, oil and fracked gas pipelines in Canada, and tar sands mining in Utah. Stopping fossil fuels is critical. But like the Hummer, don't believe for a second that changing out what fuels the vehicle solves the environmental problem. Climate scientist James Hansen knows better than most of us the importance of tackling the climate crisis. he minces no words when discussing about lesser evils. Quote, "This climate change is analogous to the issue of slavery faced by Abraham Lincoln or the issue of Nazism faced by Winston Churchill. On those kind of issues, you cannot compromise. You can't say, let's reduce slavery, let's find a compromise and reduce it 50% or reduce it 40%. End quote. There are many reasons to question the economic system we live under today, not least among them the neocolonialism, unequal exchange, and legalized corruption it's built upon. But regardless, many people believe that if there are certain prices that must be paid, so be it. The greater good represented by electric vehicles makes the sacrifice worth it. But even on its own terms, this argument is dead wrong. We are being presented with a false choice: fossil-fueled vehicles versus EVs. Would you rather our transportation system be responsible for 50,000 deaths per year or an even greater number? But here's the thing. Cars are not necessary for human life, joy, or flourishing. They are luxury goods, and the mobility they bring does not justify killing people for them. There are 8.1 billion people in the world today and roughly 1.47 billion cars. That's about 4 cars for every 23 people, which means less than 17% of people on Earth own a car. The number is actually less, since that doesn't include people who own multiple cars. If we break down car ownership by region, the picture of cars as a luxury good becomes much clearer. North America, 710 cars per 1,000 people. Europe, 520 per 1,000 people. South America, 210 per 1,000. Middle East, 190 cars per 1,000 people. Asia, 140 per 1,000. Africa, 58 per 1,000. That's a 5.8% rate of car ownership. A few generations ago, nobody had cars. If someone had told us then that accepting cars into our lives would mean condemning millions of people to death in the future, would we have accepted this technology? I'm guessing not. I think we'd have done as the great thinker Lewis Mumford proposed. Forget the damn motor car and build the cities for lovers and friends. Restore the human legs as a means of travel. I want to thank you for listening to our show and let you know a few ways that you can support the Green Flame podcast. First, you can subscribe using the podcasting system of your choice. We're listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pocket Cast, YouTube, and all the rest. Leaving us a positive review or rating on these platforms helps us reach a larger audience, so please take a moment to do that. You can also share these shows with your friends. If you're interested in donating to support the production of The Green Flame, please visit blueearthdefense.org. And finally, the real goal of the Green Flame podcast is to activate people. So if you want to support the mission of this show, start organizing to defend the land in your own community. Thank you again for listening.